Xavier Hathaway was born in 1858. He is Anton and Eloise Hathaway's only child. With no mother and the men at war, Xavier was left in his grandmother's care. She was there for as long as he could remember. She was his best playmate and teacher. He always helped her around the house. Some nights before bed, he would hear her arguing with a strange man. Xavier didn't know who the man was, but he would always come the same time of year. Whenever he would ask Gertrude about him, she would stay quiet. Later, his grandfather had returned from war. Everything seemed normal at first, but Charles was dealing with a lot of trauma. There were many nights Xavier would hear his grandfather's screams of horrors at flashbacks. Gertrude tried her best to be there for him as much as she could, but she could never understand what he went through. It had come to a point where drinking was his only escape. He would drink until all those memories were a blur. On the night the strange man returned, Charles had been drinking a lot. The two had gotten into an argument. Their yells woke Xavier out of his sleep. Frightened, he went to see what all the racket was about. Charles had threatened the man to stay away from his family. Then a fight broke out. Afterwards, the man had left and never returned. Years went by. In 1871, Gertrude had gotten sick and later passed of her illness. During that time, Charles had started to lose his memory. He didn't even know his wife had died. Xavier did his best to care for him. As his condition worsened, Xavier's uncles Christopher and John moved in to help. Charles was happy to have them around, but they still didn't get along. With his uncles helping with his grandfather, Xavier focused on his chores. When he checked the mail, he noticed a letter from a king. His name was Anton, and he claimed Xavier as his son. He wrote that he tried to see him through the years, but could no longer due to his illness. Xavier didn't know how to feel about the letter, but now those visits made sense. Before his death, Anton told his parents about Xavier. His dying wish was for his son to take the throne as king. In 1870, the Hathaways received a visit from foreign soldiers. They informed Christopher that they were sent by the king to bring Xavier with them to their home country. Christopher refused to let them take his nephew and told them to never come back. They informed him that it wasn't a choice, and that they would use force if they had to. Christopher dared them to try. John tried to calm everyone, but Christopher refused to back down. Xavier knew there was only one way to stop things from getting worse. He agreed to go with them as long as they didn't hurt anyone. They agreed and took him away. There was nothing his uncles could do about it. He was brought to a mansion where he was inspected by his other grandparents. They weren't very happy to see him. They sailed off to sea and soon arrived to the palace. His grandparents Lawrence and Juliet showed him to his new room. While it was incredible, he still missed home. The next morning, Xavier was fitted for new garments. Then his grandparents had him show his knowledge of etiquette. They weren't impressed. They immediately started preparing him to be king. Every day they had him learning something new. He wasn't good at any of it. He was very overwhelmed by it all and hardly had any breaks. He just wanted to go home. One night he managed to find some downtime. He discovered there were other children living in the palace. He introduced himself and learned their names were Marie and Amelia. Marie was the same age as him, and they had a lot in common. As they were getting to know each other, a woman stormed in. She slapped Xavier and told him to stay away from her daughters. He didn't want any trouble, so he stayed away. But Marie still wanted to be friends. So they would meet behind her mother's back. They had a lot of fun together. It was relieving to have someone around his age that he could relate to. He started to accept that this was his life now, and was motivated to work harder. He wanted to make his grandparents proud and fulfill his father's legacy. Within a few months, he was ready to take the throne. At just 14 years old, Xavier Hathaway was crowned king of the land. He would take his responsibilities very seriously. Over the next few years, Xavier fulfilled his monarch duties and wrote to his family back home. He had also grown closer with Marie. Xavier was in love with her and didn't care if they shared the same father. But Marie's mother was not having it. She told Lawrence and Juliet about their affair, and they all agreed to separate them. They gave her some money to take her daughters elsewhere. Xavier would never see Marie again. When they broke the news, Xavier was devastated. To cheer him up, they threw him a ball. While it was sad to not have his dance partner, he noticed a woman in the crowd. They shared a lovely dance. Xavier learned that her name was Nevaeh. They had shared a kiss, then went up to his room for a wonderful night. The next day, Xavier asked her to marry him, and she said yes. They were wed in 1878. That same year, they found out they were expecting. Soon they had a son. They named him James. Then, in 1882, they had another boy, Timothy, both who were next in line to the throne.